Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. Welcome to October's Geomagic Tech Tips webinar. Today we are joined by Greg George. Many of you may know him already. He is our applications engineering manager based out of the US, and today he is going to be taking you through some best practices and some workflows and some tips and tricks to help you get the most out of your FARO arm when inspecting using Geomagic Control X. A couple of housekeeping bits before we get started. If you've got any questions as we go through, make sure to put them in the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control area. And we will get to them at the end. The presentation will probably be 30 to 40 minutes with some time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So without further ado, Gigi, I'll pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Guy. So yeah, today what we're going to do is, I always like to give a quick agenda. We're going to talk about the different types of probing inside of Control X, and I will talk about quick calibration and how to go about doing a quick calibration with the FARO arm. I think a lot of people skip over that, and I get that question on occasion. So we'll do that. We'll set up a Control X inspection, and I'll explain how to do that, and with the particular bent on doing a setup for probing. And then we'll go through a few different types of workflows. Play LiveInspect, probing geometry, and live dimension, which I'll explain here in just a second. So I made a slide to kind of differentiate these. It helps kind of explain that there are different approaches or workflows inside of Control X. So most people think of us, because we're widely known for our scan to CAD inspections, right? That's where we kind of entered the market primarily many years ago, is our forte. There were lots of devices out there that would probe and create dimensions, but when 3D scanners really became more prevalent in the market, there weren't many softwares that could handle that amount of data inside of an inspection package. So that's where we came into the market with Control. So our forte has been scan to CAD for a long time. So people think of that as our main workflow, but we also do a few others here that I wanted to point out, where we can take scans and compare them to scans and do inspections that way, right? So if you have a good part that you scan and you use that as your nominal, and this goes for like some legacy parts that are out in the market, castings and things like that. You can do a scan-to-scan inspection where you scan that part again, set that as your nominal, and create a bunch of dimensions on it, and then you can compare that to another one and then dimension those. And then today, what we're going to focus primarily on is probing to CAD. So that one is pretty simple, right? You have the CAD model, and we're going to focus on probing. Again, one of the reasons why we're highlighting this is people don't realize the tools that we have inside of Control X that are very intuitive to do something like that. And then there is the option of why not both, right? Where you have scanning and probing, and you can utilize both data sets and compare those to CAD as that fourth option. And then today I'll talk a little bit about this one at the end. Again, a lot of people forget that this is even a possibility, is probing only. So if you want to create dimensions when you have no nominal model or scan, you can also use probing only workflows. So where is this in the software? So over in the live capture tab, you'll see here, I'm just pointing this out where all these tools are that I'm going to use. In the live capture tab, you have the align, probing features, live capture. Live capture is where you're going to go if you just wanted to do the scanning workflow. And then the other two, live dimension and live geometry, I'm going to show here in a minute. So it's all in that live capture tab. And what you're going to do is make sure that you go to that drop down here, the FARO arm. In today's instance, we're highlighting the FARO arm. You connect to that device. Once you do that, you can use these tools directly with Control X inside of its environment. So let's just go ahead and get started with a demonstration here. So I have the camera angle here on the screen, and what we're going to do is we're going to start off with just a quick calibration. Again, people ask this question a lot. That's why I show this, is just to reinforce that it's very easy to come in here and do a probe compensation. Now, this isn't replacing doing a calibration of sending in your FARO arm to be recertified for the year. This is just a quick calibration that people do in order to calibrate that probe on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or whatever. And what you can do here is you can stick the probe inside of that cone seat, and then you move the probe in the different directions there that the instructions tell you. And what it does is it makes sure that it calibrates that probe to that single point. Now, the next thing it's important to do is, if you're using the laser, is to also do a laser calibration too. And the way this works is you then take that probe that you've calibrated and you probe the plane that you're about to scan. And then once you do that, it has an idea of that plane's location, and then you come in here and you scan that same plane. So it's essentially tying the scanner to the probe and calibrating them together. Now, this is a few years ago, this came out, this technique here, where you scan the plane from these different directions and you pull in and out. As you can see, that's kind of behind my video a little bit there, where you kind of go in and out and calibrate the depth of field of the laser, and then you orient it in the different views here, just making sure to stay on the plate, unlike I am there. It does outlier reduction and removal, so in case that does run off the plate a little bit, but it's just a best practice to try not to do that. So you can see there that we calibrated the laser to the probe. And then what I always do is I'll go ahead and just do a quick scan, just to make sure that it comes in properly. So I'm just, yes, we're focusing today on the probing, but just so you have an idea here, that then you can just come into live capture and just scan a little bit on the part to make sure everything is coming in and it looks visually aligned. And this is just like a sanity check type thing, just to make sure that it did take, because many times if it didn't calibrate properly, it will be way off. So you'll be able to visually tell that the individual scan passes don't align with each other. So it's important just to kind of go across the part there. And again, kind of overdoing it there, but you're able to test it, make sure that the scanning works properly, and make sure that's calibrated. You can also do that with probing too, where you can probe some features and make sure that they look right. Now, for the next step is we'll go into how to set up an inspection for probing. So what I'm going to do in this instance is load up the CAD model for this part. And I don't have any data. All I've done is just drag and drop the CAD model in. And I'm just going to say I want to create a datum alignment, and then click on the faces that I want to use for that datum alignment. So I'm just dictating that top, and the two sides are going to be what I use for my datum. Call those out. And again, I am not connected to the arm at this moment. It's just calling out what I need to use for that alignment. So it's going to make sure it aligns before it does anything else. Now, the next step is just to come over and create all the dimensions that I need to call out on the part. So I'm just going to come in and just select some geometry, making sure to add my tolerances here. You can key them in, or it will remember some of the recent tolerances that you've used that are based on our metrology tab list there. You can set some rules as to the tolerances. But right here, I'm just dragging out some radial dimensions of the different spheres. And then here I can also come in and create some 3D dimensions, add the tolerance, and I can even change the alignment. So I'm saying I want to measure between that first sphere and the second sphere, but only in the x-axis, right? So I can just call all this information out ahead of time. Now we'll just go ahead and add some others. So we'll go ahead and maybe click on and add a linear dimension here, add the tolerance, and then change the alignment to the y direction, and accept that. So you can see there we have the sphere to sphere dimension. You can also do calipers like pincers inner, pincers outer in those dimensions as well. So it measures from the inside to the sphere to the inside, or the inside to the outside, or whatever you want. You see angular dimensions are very easy to call out in here as well, where I select the two different faces and say that I want to create an angular dimension between those two faces and lay it out here. So now that I've created those, you can actually group them together, right? So what I did there is I turned off that initial group and I created a new group of 3D dimensions. So if I'm getting cluttered on screen, I can just create these different views. Most of the time, these views correspond with views of your drawing, where you'll lay these out according to how your drawing is laid out, and make everything correspond to that drawing, so that way it makes some logical sense as to why you're calling these groups of dimensions out together. So you can see I did a radial dimension there and an angular dimension from that bottom plane to the side. And then here's another radial dimension on the side. We want to make sure we have enough to probe here. So I'm just going to make sure I create a bunch of dimensions here. This is a really interesting one here. I can come in and dimension that slot. Do that one more time here. Pull that up and add my tolerance, and it's a cylinder to cylinder dimension of that slot. And again, everything says no result because we're just building this ahead of time. And this could be somebody that doesn't even have a scanner or a device, right? You can have one person set this up at a different location or in the engineering group or whatever, and select all the things that they want to create dimensions on ahead of time, and then give it to an operator if need be. So we just created another linear dimension, and then we can go ahead and hide that. Now, one thing that I haven't created yet is any GD&T callouts. So if you want to add some GD&T callouts, we'll add a flatness callout to that top plane. And from there, in order to do any others, I need to make sure, like if I want to do a true position, I need to add some datums to it. So we'll go ahead and call out my datums here. And datums are really, in Control X, the way they're handled is it's just labeling that CAD face is the datum A, and then this is the datum B and C. So that way, once those are called out and labeled, you can then utilize those inside of the true position callout in this instance, or any callout that utilizes datums here. So I say A, B, and C for that true position, and then drag that out. Let's do a couple others. So if I want to do a parallelism, I could come down and say I want to do parallel to that surface right there to A. You see how easy it is? Basically just recreate those same callouts that would be on your drawing. And perpendicularity. And you can also, while you're at it, a lot of times when you're setting these up, you can actually save the views. So that way it comes into the report with that specific orientation of the CAD model. So I usually try to do that and set that up as I go. Now, in this instance, what I can do is I can also create constructions. So I just constructed a vector from those two planes, and that one vector, I can say, let's dimension from that vector to that sphere here. only in the x-axis, right? And remember, that's not the center line of that cylinder over there. It's actually the intersection of the two planes. So you can create constructions in dimension to and from those as well, as long as they can be constructed from the hard probing geometry that we're going to create here. And then here's where I'm basically setting my views. I can set my views just like I talked about a second ago, and just make sure that all those views are set in a certain orientation so you can see each of the dimensions. And then go ahead and just save the file as usual. Make sure you save. So now we're going to jump over to the Play Live Inspect. So now that that is set up, all any operator has to do is load up that file and hit Play Live Connect to the arm, and then hit Play Live Inspect, and it will guide you through here. Now the audio from Control X isn't coming through, but what happens here is it will tell you for your alignment, probe the plane, and then probe the second plane. The audio will come over the computer here. So it's just instructing you to probe all the necessary geometry to create that initial alignment, and you just follow those instructions and go through here. So now I probe those same exact planes, and before it lets you out of that dialog, it actually puts you inside of this validate mode where you can touch the probe on the surface of the part and check the deviation in those areas, and then you can even collect points there that will record the deviation in those locations. Now, when you go in, when you accept your alignment, it'll go ahead and direct you to start probing all the features that are required to measure everything that we called out. Now, you can, in this mode here, probe them in any order you want, or you can just follow. It'll move the green arrow to the next feature and just instruct you as to the next feature that you need to probe. So you can just follow along there, and this is automatically generated. We didn't tell it to select this order. And you see I'm deviating from it. I'm going to go ahead and probe that plane just because my probe was next to that plane, and then move around and say I want to probe the cylinder there, and then probe this plane. And then we'll make sure we go over into the slot here and probe those. Now we have the settings per device in the settings on the top left. So we have different types of probing in here, the different paradigms. So what I'm doing is I'm probing by hitting the green button, because that's what FARO does, is you probe by hitting the green button, and then you back away to compensate away from that plane there and hit the red button, and then it will compensate the features. In that instance, that is how FARO does it in their software. But we also have the other option of using the first point probe vector as well. So if you're used to another method of compensation, you can switch it to first point probe vector, and it will compensate based on that, the vector and the way it's approaching, because you can see the vectors of those probed points as I roll across the faces. Now I probed and I finished the inspection and it measured all the things. But another thing that's really interesting is if I needed, let's say I forgot a dimension here, I can come in and I could add dimensions. In this instance, I'm just dimensioning from two different things that were already probed throughout the inspection. So, you know, I'm just saying, hey, from that sphere to that plane, I forgot to dimension that. So let's go ahead and add that dimension, and you'll see that it adds that to the inspection, and I don't have to reprobe anything because all those features were probed. So once I have all of that, I can go ahead and create a report. Now, the report can be automatically generated. I just manually create it here just so I can show it pop up and what our reports look like. So there's all the probed information with the default views there. And there's my dimensions that we just probed with the Play Live Inspect and the different views and the different groups. So that's what, and then you can just hit, save PDF, PowerPoint. There's all these different forms. Now, here's a couple workflows that people often forget about. Probe live geometry. It's essentially like you can just walk up and throw this part down. I don't have the CAD model, and I can just start probing and creating probe geometry. So I'm hitting interactive align first, and I say I want to just do a basic 3-2-1 alignment here. And I can say, hey, I'm going to probe that top plane, and that's the z-axis, and then this is the plus axis of that z-axis. I'm going to probe the side here and accept it, right? So I'm just creating a nice alignment. And with walk-up type inspections, again, I'm just throwing down a part, and I'm almost using the device as like this advanced measuring tape, right? I don't have a pre-planned inspection ready to go. I'm just aligning to it real quick, and then I can come over to live geometry and just start probing all those things that we probed in our pre-planned inspection. So if there was somebody at another location that had Control X too, and I was at a specific location that had the part, and we don't even know, you're trying to troubleshoot what's wrong with the assembly line or whatever, I could probe a bunch of the features here that somebody might want to measure and create these. Now, we're just doing this. I'm not calling out that that's a sphere. I'm probing all the points that form a sphere. And again, the audio is not coming through the computer, but what it's saying is, as I start probing, it's saying, this is a plane. Or as I probe more points, it's like, okay, this is a sphere. And then if the form is very close between the two different types of geometry, it pops up with that drop down there. So you'll see that as I probe, it has a drop down that I can then use the arm itself as a mouse to then say, this is a plane, this is a sphere, this is a cylinder. Because you see here right now, I'm probing the cylinder. And at first it thought it was a sphere. So as I go, it'll eventually learn. Or if it doesn't, then I can dictate it from that drop down at the end. So I'm not calling out any geometry. All I'm doing is just walking up and probing. And it's determining based on the geometry what I probe, what it should be, and then I can change that if I want to. Now, with this live geometry, you can come back and say, I want to create dimensions on this, right? So if I sent this to somebody else that's trying to troubleshoot and figure out what's going on with our assembly line or whatever, I can send this file of live geometry and they can just come in and pull dimensions on this. So in this instance, I just had somebody probe a bunch of geometry, and then now I can come back and add dimensions here. And you see there, it comes up with the override. Because there's no CAD model, it doesn't know what the nominal should be. You can type in what you might want that nominal to be, right? Just by keying it in there. And you can do that under the reference there, under the angle dimension. You can type in what the reference should be, and then it'll do the math and type in a tolerance there for you. See that? So this is the workflow of measuring geometry, just like a walk-up dimension. If I just have a part of my hand, instead of using calipers, if I have to make a bunch of dimensions, I can throw that down and create live geometry. Now this is kind of taking that same workflow to another level, where I'm going to do a live align again. So I'm going to probe those features here, do a 3-2-1 where I align to the top plane, and I dictate that that's the Z plus axis, and then go ahead and probe the side again, and then we'll align it, finish aligning here. Now the difference between this workflow is we're going ahead and we're doing the interactive align, but instead of just doing live geometry, it's going to do kind of two things at once. It's going to infer the geometry that I'm probing by the same standard that we did before, where I start probing and it sees that it's a plane. But we're also going to do dimensioning. So what I did is I just did a probe select. So I just touched off on that plane because it's already probed, and I said, I want a dimension from that to, and then probed another plane as the bottom table. And then it creates not only the geometry, but the dimension all at once, right? So in this instance, I'm probing that sphere, and then I come over and I probe another sphere, and I determined that it is a sphere there. I'll just move my arm down. So now look, it created a dimension between the two spheres that I probed. Now you see that it's just inferring what the dimension should be. All is not lost there. It's making a 3D dimension between those two spheres. When I'm finished, I can actually come back and change the alignment of those as well. So it's basically assuming what I'm trying to dimension. And you see there, I just did a probe select, and then I did another probe select on the other side. Actually, no, I'm probing the other side there. And it creates a dimension across those two faces. Probe select, and then probe the other plane. And I just tell it that it's a plane, and it automatically adds that angular dimension between the two. So you see how it's very easy just to quickly walk up, probe select there to create another angle dimension, just by touching the feature itself. In this instance, we'll go ahead and dimension that cylinder. Make sure that it knows it's a cylinder. And we'll probe from that cylinder to this other cylinder. And you see dynamically it's updating on screen that goes, okay, I think this is a cylinder based on what it's probed so far. And again, it's telling you audio in your ear, cylinder, sphere, as you go. So now, once I've captured all of that, I can say exit live dimension, and then I can create a report from that. Now, you also have that ability to come in and add more dimensions like I did before, or once you're done with that, you can also change those dimensions. So if I needed to change the alignment on those dimensions or change it from radius to diameter, like everything is editable in that sense. So that's just a quick overview of how you can do probing workflows with the probing only workflows with geometry, with probing with dimensions, and using the LiveInspect option. So those are 3 different options there that you can use with Control X and the FARO arm with different probing workflows. So we do have a couple minutes if we wanted to take a few questions. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them inside of the Q&A. And Guy can go ahead and look through those if he sees any questions that are worth asking there, if anybody has any. But while we're sitting here, I do like to point out that if you need any more information, octon.com, sales information, geomagic.sales.americas@octon.com. I don't know why it's got an S there. And then for trials and support, we have the software support at octon.com, and support Americas is the email.
Great, thank you, Gigi. It looks like we've got a couple of questions here. This first one about pre-planned inspections. Is it possible to define the sequence of the probed features in pre-planned inspection?
Oh, yes. So with Control X, what we did is we did the pre-planned, we called out all those dimensions, and then we went ahead and said play live inspect. So it automatically just looks at all the features and then just determines the order. But you can actually take another step and specifically call out the order of those features as they need to be probed. There's a function in that tab that you can say probe sequence, and then you can put those in a very specific order, because maybe there is a very production oriented order that makes sense to probe those in. So yes, you have the ability to select all those features and then put them in a specific sequence so the operator repeats the same steps every time.
Great. This one kind of follows on. If I mess up on probing a feature on the part, how do I fix it?
Okay, so there are a couple different methods. One of them is, while you're still probing during the LiveInspect or live geometry, you can hit and hold the red button if you hold it and remove the last point. So if it's literally just like I slipped the probe off the side of the part or whatever, it created a bad point, I can hold the red button and remove that point. That's one way. Another option is, let's say that you finished the inspection and the part is still mounted up and there's something interesting going on. You can select an area and say, I want to reprobe this feature. So if you wanted one of those spheres, for example, you can actually click on it and say reprobe. And as long as you haven't moved the device or the part, you can go back and reprobe. So it is possible to do that without having to repeat the whole inspection. Hope that answers that question.
Great. And the final question we've got here, unless there is any more coming in, is it possible to hide the toolbars when you're probing?
Oh yeah. So the assumption there is that if you do this pre-planned LiveInspect process, maybe you don't want all of that interface showing when you have an operator using it, right? So an operator doesn't click something that they shouldn't along the way. So we do have user profiles where you can dictate, this is the operator mode, this is expert mode. So it's under the file area of Control X, where you can go down to user profiles and select operator mode and load up the part that way. And that way it shows a minimal amount of information on the screen to then run through this probing process over and over and over again. So that's how you can do that. And then that's even customizable. So if there's specific tools you want to add or remove from the operator mode, you can go in to customize the interface for operator and either add or remove even more tools from that mode, which will allow them to have a nice clean interface that's only the tools that they need to see, and without all the setup tools on screen as well.
Perfect. If there's not any more questions, then that looks like everything that we've got to today. Thank you, Gigi, for taking the time to take us through that workflow. If there's any questions that you think of after this session, then feel free to reach out on the addresses that Gigi has on the screen at the moment. You'll receive the recording for this tomorrow, and the recording will be up on our website in the next couple of days. So if you want to share that with any of your colleagues, friends, family, then absolutely feel free to do so. But thank you very much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in the next Tech Tips webinar next month.